We're excited to get to hear from Dr. Terrie Galanti tonight. Thank you, Nick, for pressing the record button there. Um, Terrie's going to lead us through a discussion of computational thinking tonight. Let me introduce Terrie, as she's a bit of a newcomer to the PICUP crowd. Dr. Terrie Galanti is an assistant professor of teaching, learning, and curriculum at the University of North Florida in our College of Education and Human Services. Terrie and I both started at UNF this past fall. She has a PhD in mathematics education leadership with a secondary concentration in research methodologies. Dr. Galanti was the first woman in history to graduate at the top of her class from the United States Air Force Academy. She synthesizes her 30 years of experience as an engineer, parent, and K-12 mathematics educator in her qualitative and quantitative research on STEM education and conceptual readiness for STEM fields of study. In her doctoral dissertation, she narrated college students' experiences with accelerated formal algebra and their opportunities to learn mathematics in meaningful ways. Her research interests converge on mathematics education as a sense-making endeavor and its connection to computational thinking in K-12 curriculum and classrooms. Sounds very familiar to what we do in physics. I had the pleasure of getting to review Dr. Galanti's slides last week, and we are in for a great discussion. She will have a lot of great insights for us in the physics world. So Terrie, welcome, and please take it away.
All right, thank you very much, Brian, for this opportunity. I will be fully transparent. When Brian asked me to come and talk with all of you, I was immediately nervous. I said the last time I've been doing physics is 1980, but as I delved into this wonderful opportunity to talk with all of you, it is intriguing to think about the connections that we can make across disciplines. And I do think that this emergent notion of more computation across our various fields is really going to open up STEM in ways that perhaps we haven't thought about it before. So I do want to set up from the beginning, this is intended to be a conversation more than any kind of presentation or me positioning myself as an expert. So please, whatever thoughts you have, it looks to me like we're a fairly small group. So please go ahead and hop on the microphone if you have a thought or add something in the chat. I will try to monitor that as we are talking this evening. So I would like to hit on 3 discussion topics. First of all, Brian alluded to this in the introduction, and thank you again, Brian. It is awkward to have someone reading your bio, but I will say I appreciate that. So I do want to kind of talk a little bit more about how my dissertation work really ties into this idea of STEM, mathematics, physics, pick your discipline, as a sense-making endeavor. Then we'll do a little bit of exploration of the literature and current thinking about what exactly is computational thinking. And my goal is to leave the last half hour of this time for you to get to put on your K-12 hat for perhaps a change and do a little logical thinking with me. So it's interesting to think about as STEM folks, we are so drawn to the data, we're so drawn to the quantitative, we're drawn to the correctness in so many cases. And I think it is important for me to begin this talk with a little bit of a narrative. And Brian gave you a little bit of my background, but it's interesting to look back and think about my education in the engineering and in the STEM realm. So certainly had wonderful opportunities at the Air Force Academy, which paved the way for me to head off to Stanford for a master's degree and a PhD in electrical engineering. And this was in 1987. And I will honestly say that after a year, I really didn't see myself continuing forward. I felt that I was not as capable, not as competent, not as prepared as many of my colleagues at Stanford were. And I remember getting up at 3 in the morning to ride my bike over to the Burroughs mainframes with my punch cards and all of those wonderful things. So I have this degree in computer architecture and I had a wonderful engineering career, but there's a part of me that said, why didn't I feel that I could continue on with this doctorate? What was the missing piece there? And as I transitioned into mathematics education as my second career, there were these emergent ideas about thinking and about what does it really mean to engage in a STEM discipline, and what does it really mean to see yourself as competent and capable? So in my time in the high school mathematics classroom, I thought more and more about this as I looked at my own students. And I taught often very advanced mathematics students. I taught multivariable calculus at my high school, but there were students who struggled. And these are students who had studied Algebra 1 early as 6th grade, yet they were struggling to go beyond the procedural memorization that had led to their success to that point. And they were afraid to dive deeper. They were afraid to be uncertain or struggle. And so I felt like we were losing people along, if you call it the STEM pipeline. We were losing students who began to doubt themselves as capable when the math became difficult for them. So all of these ideas together brought me into STEM education research as my field. And I do want to talk just very briefly about the dissertation work on hyperacceleration. And this is a term that I did not coin. Actually, Henry Picciotto in San Francisco coined it about 5 years ago. And it's almost a sociological phenomenon where students in high school who are successful in math somehow feel that the race to calculus is the sign of smartness or the sign of success in a secondary classroom. So more and more students are seeking to take calculus earlier and earlier, but we really don't have research to look at how is that positioning them to want to continue in STEM, to be successful in STEM, to make sense, and arguably to think computationally. So the statistics are interesting. 50% of students who enter four-year institutions have already studied calculus, yet some research shows that over a third of them begin back in calculus or pre-calculus, and many of them don't persist through that first calculus course. What's interesting also is that the ACT tells us that only 20% of our students are really prepared to be successful in STEM at the undergraduate level. So there's a disconnect between this increasing acceleration and students pursuing STEM fields. So for my dissertation research, I desperately wanted to do the large-scale quantitative study, multi-level modeling, all these things, prove some generalizable conclusions about why we should really challenge this phenomenon of earlier and earlier formal algebra. But the data simply isn't there. And I would argue that's because by every metric that we use for success in STEM, these students are successful. They score well on standardized tests. They get great SAT scores. But we're not seeing that sense-making and that problem-solving disposition being developed as well as we should. So for my research, I did gather several college students who had all attended the same high school. Sorry, Anne, I'll go back. So the 20% is students who are, I can just jump back to that real quickly. 20% of students who took the ACT in 2019 by the ACT metrics of being able to earn at least a B in an entry-level calculus or physics course. Those are what the numbers look like. So thank you for that question. So I began to, as I was studying this and trying to understand how to go about thinking about this, we cannot look simply at achievement, whether students are getting good grades, whether they're passing tests. We also have to look at this identity piece. Do they see themselves as competent problem solvers? And can we start to find a way to look at the ways that they think about the importance of understanding the concepts, not simply getting the correct answers? So through this narrative inquiry study, there were several themes that emerged about how these highly accelerated math students are experiencing their mathematics. And first of all, the pressures to compete came through loudly. In other words, if you are going to be competitive for a top-tier college, if you're going to be seen as good at math, you better be studying algebra in 7th grade. Otherwise, you aren't really there. But at the same time, despite them being able to identify themselves as smart and capable in middle school, as they started to move through high school, they had this hesitation to ask for help because they were supposed to be the ones that were good at math. So they don't want to have this contradiction in their identities. Here I am, I'm supposedly good at this stuff, but now I'm not really understanding it. And I want to just find the fastest path to the right answer so that I can continue to look smart. They often described, particularly at the middle school level, this emphasis on memorizing procedures, being the fastest in the room. One young lady talked about how the teacher used to throw the erasers on the desk and have kids race up and grab an eraser if they wanted to put their work on the board. So there's these pieces of what does it mean to be competent, and is it better if it takes me longer? And is that okay? And at the same time, they also articulated their own frustration with this notion that I should be learning math faster. They often articulated, I wanted to understand things better, but I just felt that the curriculum was moving faster than I was ready for it to move. So the reason I share this research with you is I think it really has important implications for how we think about our students' readiness to engage in the kinds of computational activities that we are trying to encourage them to access. I would argue that by virtue of how we define who is good at STEM in our society, we may be devaluing some of the meaningful opportunities that our students need to value things beyond just being able to get the homework question right. These very narrow ideas of success may limit the problem-solving abilities that we need to be fostering in them from the very youngest of ages. And I'll leave that third bullet for you to kind of think about on your own, but certainly the racial and socioeconomic aspects of this phenomenon of accelerating mathematics and who has access to STEM is something that all of us should be thinking about, because largely this hyper acceleration is happening in high socioeconomic areas, or arguably areas that are highly diverse, as students try to position themselves as more capable. Thank you, Bill. I have to do some looking up on that. I agree with you. There is this interesting thing of looking back on our prior experiences and seeing how we look at STEM proficiency. I would argue, and perhaps to some extent, the emergence of standardized testing, despite all of its good intentions, has channeled all of us more toward this competence demonstration instead of it being okay to struggle, which is really what we're going to try to focus on today. Is it really being okay to struggle? So bringing all these ideas together, I promise this is the last slide about my own personal journey through to my first year as a scholar. I think there's a lot of different ways in which these ideas come together as we think about STEM education. So these 3 bullets here are kind of my research trajectories. I look at model eliciting activities, K through 12. I look at students in the transition from high school to college, but to me, it all converges on this notion of STEM as a sense-making endeavor. And to me, that is a very broad construct that almost is of the ilk of problem solving. To me, computational thinking, that gives us a specificity, which is so very important as we look at an increasingly digital and computational society. In other words, our students' ability to hand calculate in math or in physics is not going to prepare them to engage in the discipline as professionals. And I know that's what motivates your work and your partnership in this organization. So I'm going to ask you to just go through a thought exercise with me. I think, Brian, when I shared these with you, I had 2 slides, and I've now inserted a third. Each of these slides is written on my understandings of the math ed world, but I think it'd be really interesting to just give you time to do a quick physics plug-in. So first, getting back to this notion of identity, or the ability of seeing oneself as capable and competent within a STEM field. I've bolded the words as you're reading this quote. This comes from Danny Martin, is a highly cited equity scholar in the math ed world. And this definition is really given in the context of social identity, but I think it's especially relevant as we think about a STEM identity. And we talk about participating and performing, and thinking about where might computational thinking fit in both of those, and students' readiness to engage with something that's new and different for them. Continuing along this sense-making trajectory, physics is more than a static set of procedures and knowledge to be accurately replicated. Physics is not a product to be acquired. Physics in the context of STEM becomes an opportunity to express, test, and refine ideas. Physics thus becomes a process which encourages students to develop, share, and take ownership. So you start to see in this conversation how the identity comes in to positioning our students to be able to make sense and to think computationally. And I'll let you read this one on your own. This is my new favorite casual read, is Conrad Wolfram's book called The Maths Fix, where he wants to basically blow up K through 12 math. So Brian was kind enough to share some relevant physics literature with me, and I was trying to process and synthesize across the pieces he shared. I pulled some quotes that I think capture what does computation perhaps look like to our students? And I especially like what Bing and Redfish. Now, this wasn't a student saying this quote, that this was their takeaway after video analysis observations of students doing computation in their physics courses, right? Talking about the results of the computation being what's most important, that they were so driven to get those symbols constructed in a way that the computational tool would process them, is that they lost the richer opportunity to solve the problem efficiently with very little use of the computational tool. So the tool itself became the focus because they were seeking to use it to get an answer. And then also these other notions of understanding what's happening underneath the code. So we can introduce a tool to students, but is it a sense-making opportunity for them, or is it our sharing with them how this tool does something better or faster than they might necessarily be able to? And then the final quote, really talking about how all of these disciplines converge, this idea of computation through math, through physics, but preparing students to be able to create with these tools versus simply using the tools. So before we continue, one of the burning questions in education, and we might argue about whether it really needs to be a burning question or not, but what exactly is computational thinking? I would love to hear your definitions, your conceptualizations, either in the chat or on the microphone. I have wonderful wait time. I'm an educator.
I guess that I'm here to learn what computational thinking is, because right now I see the computer as a tool. It's not an end in itself, much like the previous slide was talking about. We don't want to turn out coders necessarily.
Mm-hmm.
We want them to be able to code toward an end to understand what's going on with the physics in case it's an intractable problem with pencil and paper.
Thank you. Absolutely. So you're getting at this notion of the underlying thinking, thank you, Anne, tool versus outcome, right? So getting back to that previous slide, that notion of process versus product, I think as well. So yeah, and from the youngest of ages, how do we develop this acumen? How do we develop students who look at a problem that's a little frightening at first and they're excited about solving it versus wanting to know, how do I do this, right? Wanting that rich thinking to happen and having the computer relieve them of having to do the difficult thinking. So thank you for that. At this point, I will share a few definitions, but I use that word with hesitation because there is no consensus, at least that I have been able to see, and many researchers will say this. There is no consensus, there is no definition, and some might argue, do we really even need a definition if we understand the essence of what it is? But if we first go back, and actually I would say even going back further than the paper that Jeanette Wing published in 2006 called Computational Thinking for All, even prior to that, Seymour Papert coined the phrase computational thinking in his work with mathematics students as a constructionist. In other words, he believed that the greatest learning happened through students having to construct their understandings in a rich context. But CUNY, Steiner, and Wing offer this definition. Personally, this is one of my favorites. It's simple. It is the thought processes. It is how do we think about expressing our solutions as a series of computational steps or algorithms such that they can be carried out by an information processing agent. So it's not the coding skills themselves, it's the underlying conceptual understandings and algorithmic thinking, abstraction, that allows us to make use of that computational tool. Suchi Grover, again, really, really widely cited in the K-12's computational thinking world, talks about it as the process of problem analysis and decomposition that precedes coding or programming or modeling or visualization. And I kind of added in parentheses there. I don't like to think of it as a linear thing, like first I computationally think and then I code, because to me, it's a continual iterative cycle of testing and debugging. Yeah, and I would say that pseudocode is it's a representation of computational thinking. So we could even abstract, yeah, Brian, I would agree. We can even abstract further back from the decomposition. So, I'm sorry, from the pseudocode, because the pseudocode itself is a form of abstraction. If I were just to write down in words, what are my thoughts? Like, what do I want? How can I organize the information I'm given in a way that I could ask the computer to do something for me? To me, is where we sit in that computational thinking world. But it's not a before after, it is a continual back and forth, I would argue. And then Peter Denning and Maddie Tidra have a really great book. It's $13 on Amazon called Computational Thinking. It's a great quick read that gives you the history of at least their notion of it, the history of it going all the way back to the time of the Egyptians, and then bringing us to today with the challenges we're facing, because there's this notion that computational thinking is everywhere and everybody's doing it. And I personally hesitate to say that. I think it is very focused on this end goal of being able to integrate computation in our disciplines. But I like how they do this split, right? They talk about mental skills and practices, being able to design the computations, but really then being able to use that computation to explain and interpret. And to me, as instructors, as STEM educators, we want to kind of be in the fancy middle of this, right? Because we can design the computational experience for our students. We can show them. Yesterday, I was watching Mathematica videos because I was intrigued. And this wonderful young instructor in 10 minutes showed me everything I could possibly do on Mathematica. But I kept wanting to say, can you just stop and can you let me tinker and let me try some things so that I can understand this and do it on my own? Because you're just asking me to do what you're doing, right? So there's this middle that we want to be in, where our students are uncomfortable enough that they have to try to figure some things out instead of feeling like I just need to get the code in that my professor wants me to have, and I'm going to get the answer that he's or she is seeking for me to find. So I also like to think about computational thinking a little bit more broadly. And there's another big area in math ed and in the physics ed world. I know there is literature in relation to modeling for physics education, and I'm hoping you might see some places to connect here as well. But Richard Lesh, back in the early 2000s, conceptualized this thing called a model eliciting activity. And he specifically designed it as an assessment that would reveal student thinking. So it's authentic, it's real world, it's open-ended, all of those beautiful things. And so as students engage in the process of solving this open-ended contextual problem, there are different things that we want them to be able to do as they're building a solution, which is essentially their model. And I think those are very closely tied to some of the facets of computational thinking. Now, here I cite Val Shute, but you can find many, many different pieces of literature that play with these terms. So I encourage you not to be wrapped around the terms and saying, well, these are the 5 skills in CT. But it is an entry point to start to think about what it looks like. So certainly being able to create the algorithm itself is the essence of computational thinking. It's the algorithmic thinking that moves you toward being able to use this tool. But before you get there, you need to be able to define and decompose the problem that you're trying to solve in a way that you can think about how a computer could execute it. There is certainly this evaluative or self-assessment portion where how many of our students write code or use a tool and get an answer and say, got it, as opposed to this continual reflection and refinement and that sense making. Does my answer make sense? How could I tweak this to make this more efficient, better? Also, this idea of looking for patterns and then making generalizations is a huge part of computational thinking as well, because that's what allows us to make the best use of our tool. And finally, the most esoteric concept, trying to work with K through 12 teachers and thinking about these ideas. Abstraction is an extremely difficult concept for us, having been in the STEM world, we can make analogs a lot more easily to that. So again, these are some of the basic ideas behind computational thinking. And I'm watching the time and seeing I'm already at 9:30, so I'm gonna pass the slide. This is simply a quote from a book chapter that talks about how all these ideas, I think, really come together. Mathematical reasoning, scientific inquiry, as Brian suggested earlier, engineering thinking, can all sit in this envelope of computational thinking. Now, going back to Conrad Wolfram, he talks about a 4-step process. And I don't want to oversimplify this, but I think it gives us a context for a quick conversation. He talks about, before you even think of using computation, first, what questions are amenable to a computational process? Then, what abstractions do we need to be able to make use of this computational tool? Then, the actual computation itself. And finally, interpreting, or what does this answer mean? Now, the reason I pose these 4 simple ideas to you, this simple sequence, is just a moment for reflection, right? So we think about ourselves as instructors of math or instructors of physics. We teach computation. From the student perspective, they're learning the computation. So as you think about how you set up a problem-solving opportunity in your lecture hall or in your Zoom room, who's defining the problem? Who's doing the abstraction? Who's doing the computing? And who's interpreting the results? Very, very often, I might argue, in high school mathematics classrooms for certain, the students are only doing number 3. The definition is done by someone else. The procedures, the abstractions that get them toward a solution are modeled for them, and they're expected to replicate them. And the interpretation doesn't have to happen because the teacher's going to tell them whether they're right or wrong. So the computational thinking is all 4 of these steps. And what opportunities do our students have to really do all of them is what's intriguing. So our challenge as STEM educators, preparing our students not simply to use the artifacts that they can get from a machine, but to actually create their own, both in the form of problem posing and computational solutions. And I would argue the way that we get there is by making student thinking visible. Very often we send our students off to solve problems and expect them to come back with a result, and the result is how we evaluate their success. But if we think about making student thinking visible, they begin to understand how much we value that computational thinking. There's no question that we value that, promote. That's what built our passion about STEM. But what opportunities are we building for them to also build that passion, especially in this newly computational world? So once again, thank you to Brian, full credit on this one. He shared a very recent publication with me, and I know this is a little too small to really see, but I'd encourage you to go check out this citation. This is out of the Journal of, I think, European Physics, but they come up with this idea of a computational essay. And you'll notice by looking at the tiny print, what they're asking their students to do is to actually pose a problem. So find some real world question that they're interested in. Develop a computational solution. So they have to provide and communicate the context in words, and then they have to integrate the code that they use, integrate visuals, and then communicate their solution. So we're almost creating this product that's more than just what the output of the tool, but an artifact of their understanding and their sense making. And it's interesting to read this article because they talk about how this is great. There's so much possibility for it, but they're not sure it's really that good of an assessment because they can't standardize the results. They can't norm the results. And I might argue that is there no greater assessment than simply having a chance to see how your students thought through. This is an artifact of their computational thinking because they're explaining their problem. They're explaining how they use these pieces of code, and then they're reflecting on their solutions. So making all these things visible. Now, in my work with K through 12 teachers, these are I call them skills. I continue to reflect on that and think, I don't even know if I want to call them skills because they're not checkbox things. But these are the things that we want our students to be able to do in math and to be able to do in physics, to be computational thinkers. And the one that's probably the least easy to grab onto is this notion of logic, right? And perhaps the logical thinking is what underlies all of this. I would agree, Brian. There's habits of mind is another wonderful way of looking at it. Sometimes people talk about dispositions as well. Again, these are some very esoteric terms, but the nice thing about having these skills or facets is, as we're working with our students, we can name and label what they're doing. And when we're considering a problem, well, how do we decompose this problem, right? How do we break it into smaller steps? How can we gather data, and how can we look for patterns and look for places to generalize within our code? All of those kinds of questions are the underlying computational thinking. So not too bad, 9:32. I would love to now give you the chance to do some computational thinking. And so first I thought, how do I create some richly contextual physics problem? And then I said, well, wait, no, let's make the audience as uncomfortable as possible. So we'll just pick a simple logic problem and see where we take it. So this problem is called 6 balls and 6 cups. And what I would like for you to do, and I'm going to go ahead and share a document with you here in the chat. Let me go ahead and see if I can copy that link, or it's going to take me over there. And Brian or somebody, can you let me know, are you seeing a Google Slides in the screen now, or are you still seeing the PowerPoint?
No, but if you grab that URL and paste it in the chat, we'll be able to get to it.
Okay, so let me do that real quick. So, and I can actually stop sharing this and pull up the other screen just because this is new and different. Now you'll notice that when I share this set of Google Slides with you, whoops, did I just mess that up? Are you all seeing the Google Slides?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. I'm not, so I'm going to pause my other thing. So you're still seeing it, but I'm not. Okay, so here is the logic question for you on slide number 2. If you are able to be, and I can see that you are all there because I see all these wonderful anonymous avatars at the top of the Google Slides. So imagine that you have 6 balls and 6 cups that are numbered from 1 to 6. How many ways might you place the balls under the cups given the following 3 design constraints? The green ball must be under the 5th cup. The orange ball must be in a lower numbered cup than the purple ball. And the red ball, actually, I'm going to make a quick swap on that because I think I wrote my program to do the opposite. So little change in the moment here. Okay, and the red ball must be adjacent to the magenta ball. So I have given this problem to elementary teachers, to high school students, and to computer science want-to-be teachers. And we're going to think about this problem, and I want you to share your thinking with us on Google Slides. And one way you may choose to do that as you're trying to figure out or think about this computationally, here's some virtual manipulatives if you would like to have some colored balls to play with to think about how this might all play together. And on slide number 4, this is interesting. When I posed this problem to a high school teacher, she went off and created her own little cups and balls way of presenting her thinking as well. So what you'll notice beginning on slide 5 and through the rest of the presentation is simply a repetition of the question and then a blank slide. So at this point, I was going to ask either Brian or Nick if we can look at our participant numbers. It looks like there's 9 of us here. And maybe if we could go to breakout rooms in pairs, I think might be best. And each pair can grab one of these colored slides. So the way you grab that slide is you go put when you're in your breakout room, go ahead and pick a slide, put your name and your partner's name on it so that you declare ownership of it. And then I would just like you to share your computational thinking. And if we go back to those other ideas, if you're decomposing the problem, what assumptions would you make? How do you make the problem simpler? I'm less interested in the answer than I am in your thought process of how you could work your way toward an answer. So given the time we have, it's 9:37. I know that's not enough time to do this justice, but let's make it about 12, 13 minutes so that we come back together at 9:50. So if one of you could, actually, I can create the breakout rooms, right? I'm the host.
I've
I know I
got them.
cannot.
So I can,
Okay.
do you want me to open
You
them?
got them? Did you have 4 breakout rooms? Yes, please. So we'll come back together at 9:50. Oh, and I get to go too. Let's see. We can do that.
I have not used this before.
Hello, hello.
Hello?
Oh, hello.
All right. So we're supposed to make a copy of, is it slide 6?
Oh, is that how we were doing it?
Yes, slide 6.
Okay. Let's see if I can make a copy. Oh, I made a copy. Okay. So now it's slide 7 and I'll put our names on it.
Okay.
I'm here too. Oh,
Okay. So let's see. We are Bill, William, and Nick. Okay. And now we got to figure out how to put balls in cups. So let's see here. I'm going to steal this this graphic.
about to say, yeah.
Nope, that's not what I wanted to do. Wanted that and all these. Okay, there we go. There's our digital manipulative thing. Bill, it looks like you're muted.
How's that?
That's good.
Okay, I wasn't on the Zoom screen and I was pressing the space bar, and I guess it doesn't work unless I'm in Zoom. If I'm actually looking at the Google slide, then
It's the joys of Zoom.
yeah. Okay, let me unmute here. Okay, how's that?
That works.
And you can still hear me? Can you still hear me?
Yes.
We can hear you.
Okay, okay. Okay. What I would do is I would start looking at the most restrictive constraint.
I was just about to say the same thing.
Yeah. So that would be the green ball under the 5th cup.
Yep. So everything we do has to have the green ball under the 5th cup. I'm going to change this to make it easier to see. No, that just made one line. Can I make all the
See if I
lines?
can change our background color.
Oh, there you go. That's a better idea.
I'm just going to make it that.
Hey,
Is
there
gray
you go.
okay?
That's
There we
easier
go.
to see.
Cool.
Okay, and I'm just going to stack up a bunch. Oh, no, I don't want to do that. I'm just going to stack up a bunch of these little boxes.
So you're going to go brute force, huh?
That was bad. Yeah.
And then
I'm not
cross
sure
out
if
all
I-
the ones that don't work.
Okay,
Because-
so we've got our most restrictive condition, right? There's nothing
Right.
to do with the green ball other than put it in the fifth slot.
Right.
Okay, what's the next most restrictive?
Orange ball must be under purple, I guess. Or
Or lower than purple.
actually, it might be the red ball constraint. It might be more easy to implement those. I'm trying to think because they're kind of acting as two.
Well,
Yeah.
they can be in either order though.
Yeah, but there's only so many places they can be because this green ball is tied down. So there
True.
are only 4 locations that result.
True,
in that.
true. So we have 4 locations for the red and 4 locations for the magenta.
So I'm just
Actually,
gonna
only 2 for
type
each.
instead of
Yeah.
copying and pasting. But that
Cool.
means that so green is the only one that can be in the fifth. Red and magenta can be in those other 4.
Yeah.
Make that smaller. So that can be there. There. Oh,
Cut and paste.
there. 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 Okay.
I feel like we could almost build like a tree because we remember the question is only that we have to find out how many. I feel like we could build like a tree of decisions like so like red in position 1, red in position 2, red in position 3, red in position 4. They come with a set level of like magenta
Okay, what are the number of ways that we can order these? What's the permutations of 6 things taken 6 at a time? And then we throw away the ones that can't be. So really we're down to 5 things taken 5 at a time.
yeah, because green's set.
Green is set. So really we're looking at 5 things taken 5 at a time, and then we can reduce that.
So there's 720 permutations if they could go anywhere, right?
Okay.
But
Yeah.
there's really, but really functionally, the green is always in fifth. So there are only really 5 that we have to work on,
Correct.
right? So it's really 5. How many permutation can you have with 5? So there's 120 if you
Yeah.
ignore the second and third constraints. So it's got to be
Right.
less than 120.
Yeah.
So if there's only 120 things, I think my way of doing this would be to brute force it. I mean, not me personally, but
Yeah.
if you were programming this up,
Well, let's see. We know red and magenta have to be in the one of the first 4, and so they can't be in the 6th place.
So
So-
what that means is that there's only, because red and magenta can't be in the 6th. So 6th has to be yellow, purple, or orange, right?
And it can't be orange because purple has to be lower than orange.
Well, it could be.
Oh, wait, well, no, it can't be
purple.
Yeah.
purple. Yeah.
Yeah.
Can't be purple.
Okay, so there's 2 options for the last one, right?
Yeah.
So if we think of this, right, as just writing possibilities, there's 2 that can go in the last one. There's 1 that can go in the 5th.
Yeah.
And that means there are
So now we're left with 4 things taken 4 at a time. Well, no, because
quite.
red and magenta have to be next to each other.
yeah.
I did something. I found out there there are 6 possible ways that they can exist. Yeah. Like just putting red in a different position and
Yes.
on both outsets. Yeah, it can only exist once.
Yes, I agree.
So we could take that fact and then say, okay, so if red's in the center, I think. Because let's say we have red on far left, that means magenta has to be next to it. And then it has to be purple and then orange going from left to right. And that's set. Once you have that red on the far left, you have that. That's the only one. When you put red one to the right, then you can have magenta on the left or on the right. And if it's on the left, then your purple and orange are set. If magenta's on the right, then purple has to be on the left, and then you have that. I feel like at this point, we really have a way to just kind of branch out all of the possible decisions and then add them up.
Yeah.
Yeah. If I were writing a piece of code to do this, I would try whatever it is.
Yeah.
I think 6 permutation is like 720 possibilities or something. I just set up all 720 and then run them through and check the rules and eliminate the ones that broke a rule. And
Yeah,
count up how many there were.
that would be the computational way to do it, is just set up, narrow it down a little bit with the green, and then just set up the rest of your rules and go through if-thens.
Yep.
And count the ones that match the rules and throw out the ones that don't. That would be the computer way to do it.
Yep.
So here we are, we physicists are sitting here trying to get the right answer by not using the computer, when it might be easier to actually code the thing and just let it blitz it out.
Well,
So how does that?
I'm not sure. I feel like there are deceptively few options in this problem.
I'm going to
Because
jump back to the main room just to coordinate things, but it's been a pleasure working with you two.
Okay.
Yeah, it's been a
Enjoyed
pleasure
it,
meeting you.
Nick. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? It starts to emphasize why that struggle is important.
Mhm.
Nick, did you see my SOS message? Help.
I did. I saw that. Yeah, I'm not sure what happened. Apparently, if you jump into a breakout
No.
room, it takes away your privileges.
No, what actually happens is if you hit the leave the meeting button, you leave the meeting.
There you go.
I've never done that before. I go in and out of breakout rooms all the time and never did that before. So, all right. Oh my gosh. Did you all see slide 12? There's some serious work going on slide 12. Brian, I think Brian might never come back to get him back here.
Well, my group started trying to do this logically, and then very quickly decided, well, there's only like 720 possible combinations. We're going to brute force this thing.
Yeah, exactly. And that's, and Ann and I were just having that conversation that, okay, when you get to that point, you want the computer to do the job. Like, I don't want to brute force that. And that's the beauty of having a computer. Because if I can get my computer to generate all 720 solutions with test conditions, I get an answer, right?
Yep.
So that's, yeah. But it's like, to me, it's that if you don't do that logical thinking first, and if you just present, well, we're going to write a program to do this, there's almost this lost sense of why I need the program. And like, I want to struggle and realize I don't want to make all these things first, right? So.
All right.
I'm
Would
going
you
to
like
delete
me
my
to,
SOS message.
Would you like me to close the breakout rooms?
Yes, please.
All right. It gives them a 60-second countdown to do.
Yeah. So thank you again. So Ann and I were sitting here and problem solving together. I can't message Nick and tell him I'm not a host anymore. So I started thinking I'd email Brian, and then I thought, no, wait a minute, I got the slide. All right, I'm going to go back here.
Yeah, I haven't used Google Slides in that way. I'll have to think about that for some upcoming stuff.
You know, Ann, if you'd like to talk about that sometime, I have a fair amount of experience doing it. And it is such an amazing way to hold students accountable for what they're working. Like I have my students, they're all taking pictures of their work on their phone, their handwritten work, and they're posting it on the slides so that they can share it with each other. And I can see what they're doing during a problem solving section. And then I can select and sequence what solutions we're going to talk about. So that's what, again, gives the students their agency, right? Their
Well,
authority.
it may be great for tomorrow's office hours when that vector addition homeworks for both classes. It's
Well,
the-
and the other thing that's really hard to do, because we have this knowledge we love to share with our students. That's why we're teachers. But telling them, you know what, I'm sure that you all can do this. Let's see what you try, and then I'll go from there, because they just want us to tell them, right? And making them share their work is interesting and challenging. All right, well, welcome back, everyone. So thank you to Nick for rescuing me when I accidentally left the meeting. And let me see if I can bring, so if we had more time, and I still have the Google Slides open, as do you, I would ask each group to share out. Tell me what you thought about, and where did you decompose? What abstractions have you thought about? Arguably, my little 6 grid and those colored balls are an abstraction of the problem that's useful in moving your thinking forward. But I am going to go ahead and go back to the PowerPoint because I want to share some solutions with you. Give me just a second to do that. So if I do this, share, and someone will let me know if you see the slide again that says the logic question. Okay, so what I wanted to do is to share a couple of solutions with you. One created by a high school teacher that I work with that's in a computer science program, and then one that I created using a block-based programming language. As you're looking at these solutions, think about how you talked about the problem and what questions might you ask? Because that's the hardest part of this, right? The computational thinking doesn't emerge organically. We're going to go into that breakout room and then we're going to ask them, well, what have you thought about so far? What are you noticing here? What patterns do you see? So Helen actually created these pictures, and then she narrowed down what the possibilities were for each of the 6 different cups. And she actually created a written sequence. I think, Anne, you had asked earlier about pseudocode, right? To me, this is a computational thinking in advance of pseudocode, because it's interesting. She did move toward a computational solution, but not one that I expected. So let me show you on the next slide what she did. So she did program it. She did create all 18 solutions. But I'm not going to tell you what I'm noticing here. I'm going to let you look at it for a minute or two and think about, what did she actually program the computer to do? And no need to answer aloud. I'll give you about 30 more seconds to just kind of look at that. She created a computational representation, right? What the instructions she has here is what she told the computer to do. And the computer did it, and the computer gave all 18 solutions. So, and then she just also posted a picture of all of the thinking that she did to get her to that place. Now, we as instructors will never sit down and try to look through all of this. But the fact that I asked her for it tells her how much I value her rough draft thinking as much as I value the solution, even if it were wrong. So I said, well, I'm going to go to Snap, which is a block-based programming language derived from Scratch. And I thought, you know what? I want the computer to make all 720 of those. And I want the computer to test all of those options for me. And I can put this link. Oops, no, I can't. Let me go back here. I'm going to stop sharing for a minute, and I can put this link in the chat if you're interested in watching this program run just for fun. But I'm like, you know what? I'm going to use some recursion. I'm going to get those permutations created, and then I'm simply going to test them all, right? So it should work out that if you click on this link and I will try it as well. It should take us to the program, and it's kind of fun to watch it run. And if I were to actually do this in a high school classroom where I was teaching permutations and combinations, I might actually run the program first and then let's see, run it. Can I make this bigger? Yeah, I can. I don't know. Are you seeing my screen running this program? You're not? Okay, give me a second. Now are you seeing my screen running the program? All right. So you'll notice that the sprite is reporting out every solution that, give me a second. It's generating and printing the solutions as it reports them. I can see how each permutation is being generated, and I'm keeping a count. So the beauty of something like SNAP is it makes that the thinking that I put into creating the program very visible. And whether I as a teacher decide to just have them do it by hand and then try to work toward a computational solution, or maybe share this first and then ask them where do they see decomposition in what I said? Where do they see abstraction? What patterns am I making use of? What logical thinking, right? We can look at it from both directions. But to me, this is just a manifestation of my handwritten work and computational thinking. Now, I'm going to go back very quickly because I see I have 2 more minutes. Did anyone have any thoughts on the difference between Helen's approach and my approach as far as computational thinking goes? I'll go back to, are you seeing the PowerPoint again? Fantastic. All right. So here's Helen's computational solution. 18 orderings, and then my computational solution. What's different about the computational thinking that each of us did in getting our solution of 18 orderings, right? To me, that's a rich question. If anyone has thoughts, please share. Yeah, thanks, Brian. And so why might Helen's have great, oh my gosh, what a great conversation. I would keep you all here for an hour talking about this if I could. But why does Helen's have fewer iterations than mine did?
She reduced the problem set.
Yeah, I agree.
I think she actually just told it to print out what she'd already figured out.
Yeah, let's go back to the previous one, right? So she figured it out on this page. And I think then she was actually having the computer create all of those visuals based on what she already found to be the answers, right? So an interesting conversation to have with students, if we're thinking about computation as leveraging the power of the computer, Helen's approach versus my approach, which one really leverages what the computer does versus creates a computational solution. So interesting opportunities for conversation, both valuable thinking. I would argue Helen perhaps thought more than I did about it because I didn't want to go through the trouble of finding them all myself. I wanted to let the computer do it. So again, I hope you enjoy this little example just to give you a sense of what, if we had all the time in the world with our students, what really fun engagement with computational thinking might look like, and how we can connect our rough draft thinking to creating a computational artifact. So I really appreciate you all being here with me. For me, it's late at night. For West Coasters, I know it's about dinner time. I'm going to offer a rhetorical question before we end. And just as you walk away from this presentation, how do we continue to encourage our students to see themselves as computational thinkers? I would argue a problem like that, if I design a problem that no matter what my student's background is, that they can offer an idea, any student could create a set of 6 balls that would be one of the possible solutions. So if I'm thinking about problems with entry points that help my students see themselves as logical thinkers, I'll probably build some STEM persistence and interest and resilience. So, and I'll stop there. I'm happy to stay if Nick or Brian is happy to. I'm happy to stay to answer questions, and thank you so much for stopping by.
Thank you, Terry. We'll all virtually offer our appreciation for that
Thank you.
wonderful presentation. Yeah, I'm happy to moderate questions. Look out in the chat. Folks, the presentation formally is over, so if you need to get to bed or get to dinner, we certainly understand that, but we welcome any questions that people have.
And I'll throw up real quickly my email address if anyone would like to